effectively, Ambassador Wisner was talking as a private citizen. They disowned his comments in that respect. They said that they were very grateful. Regarding the mediation that you mentioned, Monday traveling to Cairo to speak directly to President Mubarak, but that mediation role, if you will, as an envoy was sort of punctual and is now over. So that suggests that his role effectively as a key advisor may have changed slightly, and they certainly said that they do not stand by that comment that he made it as a private citizen.
And meanwhile, Hillary Clinton talking about Egypt potentially being all part of this perfect storm, as she termed it.
Absolutely. Secretary Hillary Clinton had her speech today in Munich hours ago is actually very similar to his speech earlier on in Doha. She said that the U.S. is calling for reform in the Middle East, political and economic reform. But very interestingly, something that has been new and that we have noticed, you know, in all that call for a transition that must take place for democracy to happen in Egypt, there was a possibility and there was word that it could take place in the form of a caretaker government, possibly headed by the current Vice President Omar Suleiman, and he mentioned his name today. So, of course, analysts speculating about that, but really the White House and the State Department, they all have been very vague regarding this. It's a very delicate matter, and they've been very careful in how to word every statement they have, Nick.
So ultimately, are we any clearer about the President's position on Egypt and on whether or not President Mubarak should step down after Frank Wisner's comments and after what's been happening in Europe?
Not after the ambassador's comments, but it's a very good question. President Obama, according to an American newspaper, the New York Times precisely, they said that supposedly in private was calling for Mubarak to step down immediately, but that's not what he has been saying officially. The last time he spoke about it was in Canada yesterday, and he just said that Mubarak should make the right decision, obviously not suggesting or giving any time frame for this or saying what he meant clearly. So it's still a bit of a mystery.
All right, well, let's see how things develop. Perhaps things will come clearer as days go on. Monica, thanks a lot. Well, with the protests against Mubarak showing no sign of abating, many observers are looking to the United Nations to step in, but at the UN Security Council, the issue is not even up for discussion. Scott Heidler, I'm sorry, we've already had this story, haven't we? So we don't want to see it again because we've seen it once. It's good enough. Okay. I'll tell you what, let's show you some live pictures from Cairo as we sort all this out, and we can see that actually we possibly haven't even got that, and we may have some latest pictures. I'll tell you what, we'll talk about what's going to come on later in the programme. We've got all this, including accident or an act of sabotage. Egyptian authorities try to figure out what caused this explosion on a key gas pipeline. And David Cameron says multiculturalism has failed to help Britain become integrated. So what's the Prime Minister's solution? We'll find out in just a minute.
Qatar, through Qatar Petroleum and its partners, has been adopting ambitious plans aimed to expand its exports of natural gas in its liquefied form into remote international markets and to supply piped gas to regional markets. In implementing those plans, Qatar has been benefiting from its strategic geographic location and the relatively low cost of producing gas from its territories. Qatar Petroleum.
A popular uprising that shook the country to its core. A defiant president under siege from his people. As the protesters took charge of the streets, we look back at the events that are changing Egypt.
I will stay on the air if I can until the police come
in a special program, Al Jazeera gives you a day-by-day account from those that witnessed them firsthand. Egypt burning, at this time on Al Jazeera.
You're watching Al Jazeera's extended coverage of the ongoing turmoil in Egypt. Let's have a reminder of the latest developments. A senior US official has backed Hosni Mubarak's insistence on staying in power until September. Ambassador Frank Wisner said Mubarak's leadership was crucial for an orderly transition, but a spokesman for the US State Department said he was not speaking for the government. The leadership of the ruling National Democratic Party has resigned, according to state television, and party veteran Hossam Badrawi has taken over as the NDP's Secretary General. Well, we're looking at pictures there of Cairo, of Liberation Square, but anti-government protests not just confined to the capital. They've been continuing right across Egypt. Let's get more from our correspondent in Alexandria. We've got these latest pictures there from some of the protests that took place in daylight hours, but I understand the protesters are still very much there on the streets in Alexandria. Let's speak to our correspondent. What is the latest?
Yes, indeed, Nick. It is well into the night here in Egypt's second largest city, and there are several sit-in protests that are taking place. Roughly up to 10,000 people are gathered across the city. Some are outside the main train station, Sidi Gadaf train station. Others are in and around Qa'id Ibrahim Mosque, which is in the downtown area next to the commercial center of the city, Mahatat al-Raml. And then there are some outside Mahatat Masr. So there are three separate main gatherings of protesters, pro-democracy demonstrators, who say they will be holding these sit-ins 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, until and unless President Mubarak leaves office or indeed departs the country. So the momentum is still going here. They're expecting large amounts of crowds to gather yet again tomorrow, Sunday, for one of those three main days of protests that the opposition have been calling for. Those are Sunday, Tuesday and Friday of every week, Nick.
Just wondering about the makeup of the crowds there. We're seeing all sorts of people in these pictures. And indeed, of course, we mustn't forget that Alexandria was the scene of a terrible attack at the beginning of the year.
Indeed, there was that attack which shocked many here in Alexandria at a church in this Mediterranean city. But despite this, and despite the division that it risked causing, people from all walks of life really have gathered here in Alexandria. Christians, Muslims, religious, non-religious, no religion whatsoever, from all classes as well. And that's what's been the most unifying factor here, not only in Alexandria. I mean, I've been traveling across the country the past 12 days, and the most outstanding thing and truly touching thing is that the protesters calling for an end to Mubarak's regime have come from all walks of life, all economic backgrounds, and that's something that's really given this movement some sort of strength, because in the beginning, if we remember, if we go back a few weeks, the government tried to counter this movement by claiming it was only, for example, from the Muslim Brotherhood, or claiming it was only a fringe element of society. But in fact, wherever you go, whoever you speak to, everyone knows someone who comes from a different background who is partaking in this, and that really is a strength which many of the pro-democracy protesters say is on their side.
And what about the plan for the future? I mean, it's clear that everybody's united on this, on the aspect of the president being forced to step down, but what about after that? Have they got a real vision for what's required and what will take place and what will fill the gap?
Well, the three core demands are the departure of the president from office or even from the country, together with his regime, and then the dissolution of parliament, and that includes both the lower house and the upper house, which many Egyptians, and in fact many human rights organizations and governments around the world criticize for being rigged, unfair parliamentary and senatorial elections, and then the rewriting of the constitution. Now, this is where everybody is agreed upon. Where people aren't agreed upon is who is going to take this forward, who is actually going to implement this. Some within the opposition, for example, say, well, they wouldn't mind if Vice President Omar Suleiman ran things for an interim period in order to get those three goals. Others say, no, they don't want Omar Suleiman because he's too close to Mubarak, and actually they don't want anything to do with the governing NDP. Some say, for example, they might want Al-Baradei. Others say Amr Musa. There's a lot of names that are being touted. But the thing is this. probably if the protesters are to succeed, the most likely scenario that many would like, as in the most optimum scenario, I think that many people would accept, would be some sort of unity government which involves representatives from all major political parties here, like the Muslim Brotherhood, like the West, like Zahad, like Kifaya, who would form some sort of interim committee, an almost administrative government for a short period of time, whereby they could put the mechanisms in place for free and fair elections. Obviously, that's very theoretical because you're talking about a celebration of democracy in Egypt that has been long overdue. It is not in the norm of this most populous